There we go. We wanted to get this finished up before we'll have a couple Sundays kind of in an interim. And so I just wanted to finish this section under the broader heading of what happens when we die. We've talked about soul sleeping is where we started. We discussed the passages that are oftentimes offered up in that particular defense. And moving now to annihilationism, and again, just by way of connection, I don't know any group that teaches soul sleeping that does not also teach annihilationism. All right? But there are some people that teach annihilationism that do not teach soul sleeping. Does that make sense? You know, Jehovah's Witnesses, your Seventh-day Adventists, they're all soul sleepers. Right? But they all also teach annihilationism. But there are others who do not believe in soul sleeping, but do teach annihilationism under basically the guise of God just wouldn't do that. I don't see how God can punish somebody in eternal flame and torment for all eternity. So therefore, in order to reconcile my idea with God and what God ought to do and everything, then I'm going to teach that God's just going to wipe everybody out. All right? And so that's when we started last week and looked at some of the passages about being utterly destroyed, utterly perished, destroyed, and perished. And we noted that that's in the New Testament that the word for defile can also be the exact same meaning. If any man defile the temple of God, him will God destroy. Well, those are the same two words in 1 Corinthians 3 and verse 17. And then we talked about utterly destroyed in the context, first of all, with the Isaiah 34:1, but it was in the context of the destruction of nations that had actually begun back in chapter 13 and included, I don't even remember, we walked through them, but it was like at least a dozen different Gentile nations. And then the nation of Israel and the nation of Judah were all included in that. There was Babylon and Assyria and Moab and Tyre and Ethiopia and Egypt. I mean, the list just went on and on. And obviously we know that those things did not cease to exist in an absolute sense. And so the context would not lend itself to ceasing to exist in an absolute sense. Because Jerusalem still exists. You know, Samaria still exists, and so the language did not demand that particular rendering. And then we looked at an argument from the idea that this guy presented an argument. He said, "Well, I don't believe it." He says, "But there's some validity to the doctrine," which I just reject that premise outright. But I understand what he's trying to do. His point is, just because you don't believe it, just don't write somebody off as being ignorant or a false teacher because they may embrace this. Because, in other words, there are some verses and words that could be used that if a person didn't study them carefully and come to a proper understanding of them and how they're used in other places, could get the idea of annihilation. And so he was talking about what were called finality words, such as the word perdition or destruction. And yet, he cited Hebrews 10 and verse 39. We are not those who draw back unto perdition, but those who believe unto the saving of the soul. And so we correlated Hebrews 10:39 with 2 Peter 2:20. That says that a man's better off to have never known the way of righteousness than to have known it and turned away from it. And the key was the end is worse than the beginning, or the latter end is worse for them than the beginning. And we had to ask the question, if it's all the same, if everybody that's not saved just ceases to exist, how in the world can the end be worse than the beginning? And Walter made the point, and rightfully so, and I think accurately so, that we carry our memories into eternity. Else it wouldn't make any sense for us to be judged. That you couldn't judge a person based on things that they didn't know that they had done. And so the idea of judging somebody based on things that they possibly couldn't know, and then this one would be lost and then saved and then lost. How is the end in any way to be interpreted as worse than the beginning? It's all the same. If everybody just for lack of a better, just vaporizes. I mean, that's really the essence of the doctrine of annihilationism. You just cease to exist in any form. I mean, it's not like your soul just dies and doesn't wake up. It's just obliterated. There is no more soul for those that believe in the doctrine of annihilationism. And so, and Walter made the point, we carry our memories, and that's how the end is worse than the beginning. That a man that would be saved, if he was ever to be lost after being saved, which the Bible teaches that absolutely can happen. The doctrine, the false idea of once saved, always saved notwithstanding, a saved person can be lost. I mean, Revelation teaches you can have your name blotted out. And Jesus spoke in more than one place about having your name blotted out. Well, if it's in the book of life, you're saved. And if it's blotted out, you're lost. And that's how the end is worse than the beginning. What a horrible thought it would be to spend eternity in hell, knowing that at one point in your life, you were not consigned to this place. That if you had died in that condition, you wouldn't be there right now. But because of my personal lack of diligence, my lack of steadfastness, losing my faith, or loving some sin more than I love the Lord, that I ended up here, and then that's how the end would be worse than the beginning. That I knew I didn't have to be here because I knew better. I knew better than to be here. And then Walter, we also mentioned that how can we understand not only that the end is worse than the beginning, if it's all the same, how can there be few stripes and many stripes? Luke 47:48 says, unto whom much is given, much is also required. It says, and he who knew his master's will and did not prepare himself shall be beaten with many stripes. But he who did not know his master's will and thus did not prepare himself will be beaten with few stripes. How are we to understand the concept of few stripes and many stripes if everybody is on an equal plane? If everybody just ceases to exist. And so we noted that 2 Peter, this is one of those passages, or these are some of those passages that are key for us, because and this kind of goes all the way back to our study on premillennialism, in that when somebody takes an obscure verse and builds an error around it, there's probably a real simple verse somewhere else that we can point to show why that interpretation is wrong. And the example I always use is you can have a mathematical equation that covers this board, some type of theory or problem that might cover this board in several lines. But if at some point in that equation there's a 2 plus 2 and he writes down 5, the rest of it's wrong. In other words, if I see his solution and so at some point I see 2 plus 2 and he's got 5 under there, I don't even have to know how to work the rest of it because I know it's wrong. Because why? I know what 2 plus 2 equals. And it ain't 5. And so if you put 5 in there, the whole thing falls apart. Well, the same thing goes here. This idea of annihilationism, there may be some obscure passages and some poetic language, like in the book of Ecclesiastes and the book of Psalms, and the concept of that we sleep when we die. The word sleep is used interchangeably with death. But to build a whole doctrine of annihilationism around that is just bad Bible study. And so these are some of those passages. 2 Peter 2:20-22, Luke 12:47-48, that are all passages that will not permit the idea of annihilationism. Now, what I want to do for a few moments tonight is look at some passages of Scripture. All right, take your Bibles if you would, and let's open to Matthew 8 and verse 12. Let's just start there. And we're not going to look at a lot of passages because it's not necessary. One of the things that Toby and I have talked about so many times through the years, especially when we're spending time together in Ghana and whatnot, is that we make a reference back to something that Brother Guy Woods said at the Open Forum in 1967. He and I both have a CD of the Friedharpen Lectures Open Forum where people would ask questions, and Guy Woods would stand up there and he'd take any question you wanted to ask, and he'd answer it. And he made a statement about Matthew 19 and verse 9 about marriage, divorce, and remarriage. And the statement that that Brother Woods made in connection to that, he says, what would the Lord have to say if he wanted to say something other than what he said? In other words, what Jesus said in Matthew 19:9 is just as clear as crystal. But if he wanted to say something else, what would he have had to say? You see what I'm saying? So some of the passages are just so perfectly clear that if the Lord was trying to teach something else, why did he say it like this? All right? And so I want us to think in that mindset. In other words, if the Lord was trying to teach annihilationism, why would he say this? All right? Let's look at Matthew 8 and verse 12. It says, let's go to verse 11. Now, this is Jesus talking about the centurion. All right? And the centurion has expressed the matter of his faith. Lord, I'm not worthy for you to come under my roof. And Jesus said, I've not found so great a faith, no, not anywhere in Israel. Now, listen to what he says in verse 11. And I say to you that many will come from east and west and sit down with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. But the sons of the kingdom will be cast into outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. All right, turn over in your New Testament to Matthew 22. And begin in verse 11. Again in verse 11. Matthew 20. This is the parable of the wedding feast, where a king made a marriage for his son, and everything is ready, and everybody that's been invited has been bidden to come, and the Jews who are represented as the invitees refuse to come. All right? And so then he invites other people in. He's talking about the Gentiles. And in verse 11 it says, but when the king came in to see the guests, he saw a man there who did not have on a wedding garment. And he said to him, friend, how did you get in here without a wedding garment? Or how did you come in here without a wedding garment? And he was speechless. And the king said to his servants, bind him hand and foot, take him away, cast him into outer darkness. There will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Now, this is a reference to those, in essence, who present themselves as Christians, but they don't have, he wasn't wearing the wedding garment. In other words, he hadn't been baptized into Christ. He hadn't put on Christ. Had when we're baptized, we're joined to Christ when we obey the gospel. But the point is that here's a guy who presents himself as a Christian, but he is not a Christian because he's not obeyed the gospel, but he's cast out into outer darkness where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Now, in the first account in Matthew 8, we got the Jews, right? It's the Jews that are cast into outer darkness where there's weeping and gnashing of teeth. In this count, we have the Gentiles, the unprepared Gentiles who are cast out, and there is weeping and gnashing of teeth. But my question is this: when does the casting out take place? Sean, when does the casting out take place? At the judgment. The casting out takes place at the judgment. And so then after the judgment, we have a descriptive term of the state of the unsaved. That they are in outer darkness, and there is weeping and gnashing of teeth. By the way, the gnashing of teeth is the idea of excruciating pain.
I always thought it was grinding your teeth.
Yeah. So it has intense pain involved. Now, my question is this: if this doctrine was true, why did Jesus say what he said? Why would Jesus describe annihilationism as outer darkness where there is weeping and gnashing of teeth? You see, if Jesus wanted to teach annihilationism, he certainly wouldn't have used that type of language, would he? Now let's look at another passage. Look in the Gospel of Mark. And I want you to look in Mark, chapter 9, beginning in verse 42. Mark 9 and verse 42. Jesus said, whosoever causes one of these little ones to stumble, it would be better for him if a millstone were hung around his neck and he was thrown into the sea. And if your hand causes you to sin, cut it off. It's better for you to enter into life maimed rather than having two hands to go to hell, into the fire that will never be quenched, where the worm does not die and the fire is not quenched. Then if your foot causes you to sin, cut it off. Better to go to hell having one and lame rather than have 2 feet to be cast. Better be lame to go into life than to enter to hell having both feet in the fire that shall not be quenched, where the worm does not die and the fire is not quenched. And then the eye comes into play in verse 47. Again, the worm does not die and the fire is not quenched. Now, if annihilationism is true, why did Jesus back to back to back describe hell as a place of never-ending torment, where the fire is not quenched and the worm does not die? Does that description correspond to this doctrine at all? John?
Why, if annihilation is true, why did Legion desire to go into a earth's fire?
That's exactly right. What? Yeah. I didn't even have that written down, but that's a great point. What did they ask Jesus?
Why did they desire to go into that for a season or for a time rather than go straight to?
That's exactly right. Now, I don't want to put you on the spot.
Go ahead.
But what did they say? What did the demons say to Jesus? What did the demons say to Jesus in that respect? We know who. Say it, Sean. Do not. Have you come to torment us before the time?
Before the time, meaning the judgment.
That's exactly right. Notice they knew that there was a torment.
Separate.
That's right.
And beyond where they were going.
That's exactly right. There's a torment beyond this that they knew was coming, and rather than wander aimlessly, they asked for permission to enter into the swine in the temporary. Right. But the point of the matter was, even the demons know that there is an eternal torment that awaits them. Right? Now, a passage that corresponds to that is 2 Peter 2 and verse 4. 2 Peter 2 and verse 4. For if God did not spare the angels who sinned, but cast them down to hell and delivered them into chains of darkness, what? To be reserved for judgment. To be reserved for judgment. That corresponds perfectly with what the demons asked of Jesus. Have you come to torment us before the time? So, again, ultimately, going back to kind of what Toby and I were talking about, if Jesus wanted to teach annihilationism, it would have been easy, wouldn't it? Wouldn't it be easy to teach annihilationism? Just come right out and say it, right? Just come right out and say it. At the judgment, those that are not saved will cease to exist, and only those that are saved will live on, and they'll go to heaven. See, I just said it in about 15 seconds. Why didn't Jesus ever say anything like that? Why did he say, outer darkness, weeping and gnashing of teeth, fire is not quenched, worm dieth not? Why? Do not fear him that can destroy the body but cannot touch the soul, but rather fear him who can destroy both body and soul in hell. Matthew 10, about 28 to 30, if I'm not mistaken. Sean, what are you going to say?
That there's consequences for your actions.
That's right. And if annihilation be true, there's no real consequence for your actions. I mean, not really. Not really. And so,
You can go through life just doing whatever you want to do and just say, I'll do what I want to do.
I'll just be done. That's right. I'll do what I want to do in this life, and when I die, my soul will go to sleep, and I'll wake up and be judged, and nothing's going to happen. Boy, that's terrible punishment, ain't it? I mean, it just doesn't, number one, it runs contrary to the justice of God. It runs contrary to the holiness of God, and runs contrary to every description that we have of eternal torment and punishment. Yeah, John.
When you started, I went to Hebrews 10, 27 through 29.
That's right. I think I made an allusion to that in passing. Go ahead and read it.
Let's see. Both certain fearful looking for of judgment and fire and indignation, which shall devour the adversary. He that despised Moses' law died without mercy under 2 or 3 witnesses. Of how much sore punishment suppose ye shall he be thought worthy, who hath trodden under foot the Son of God, and hath counted the blood of the covenant wherewith he was sanctified an unholy thing? Hath he done despite and under the spirit of grace?
Yeah, and then the next verse says, "Vengeance is mine."
Belongeth to me.
That's right. So from Hebrews 10 and verse 26 through verse 30, we find that there is an unspeakable punishment that awaits those who have trodden underfoot the Son of God, counted the blood by which they're sanctified as a common or unholy thing, and done despite or insult to the Spirit of grace. I mean, that's, again, none of that can be reconciled with this concept of annihilationism. And there are a bunch more verses that we could talk about. There's the resurrection of damnation, John 5, 28, 29. There's the smoke from their torment ascends forever and ever, Revelation 14 and verse 11. They're cast into the lake of fire, which is the second death, Revelation 20 and verse 15. There's the admonition in Revelation 20 verse 6 that whoever is a partaker of the first resurrection shall not be harmed by the second death, which the first resurrection is the resurrection from the waters of baptism. In other words, those who have been resurrected in the first resurrection, because there's going to be a second resurrection, the resurrection of all the dead. But if you take place in the first resurrection, then the second death has no power over you. In other words, you don't fear it. But the implication is, if you're not a part of the first resurrection, there is something bad waiting for us, or you, or me, or whoever that person is, when the second resurrection takes place. All right? There's a second death.
Say something about our mortal body's not going to be there. So how do this torment going to be without
Right. Now, the mortal body will be present. The mortal body will be present.
have teeth like chattering?
All right. Furman asked a question about how does the mortal body fit into all this, and what you have is in 1 Corinthians 15 and beginning in verse 50. It says, "We shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed. For this corruptible, this has to put on incorruption, and this mortal, this has to put on immortality." And the way I've always described it is this, and I don't know if this is accurate, but to me it makes sense. In this life, the physical body is the home of the soul, right? The physical body is the home of the soul. In the next life, the soul is going to be the home of the body. This mortal will put on immortality. this physical, this corruptible will put on immortality. This mortal will put on immortality. There will be a physical resurrection of our bodies from the dead. I mean, John 5, 28, 29. Marvel not at this, for the hour is coming in which all that are in the graves will hear his voice and come forth. They that have done good to the resurrection of life, they that have done evil to the resurrection of damnation. There will be a physical resurrection. But our bodies will be changed from a mortal body to an immortal body. In other words, a body that cannot cease to exist. But I was reading something on that when everybody's raised, everybody is changed to an immortal body. And an immortal body cannot be destroyed. Right? So you're an immortal body. You're either immortal in heaven or you're immortal what?
Hell.
In hell. That's right. Everybody's going to be raised. And everybody's going to put on immortality. That's how all the bodies exist through eternity. Is the mortal puts on immortality. The question is, will I be an immortal with God? Or will I be an immortal in the place that God created for the devil and his angels? What are you going to say, John?
That's better than what I was going to say.
All right.
You trumped me there on that. Regardless, this is the way I look at it, but regardless of whatever state you're in, we're taught that there is a consciousness, and that's all that matters.
That's right. There is a consciousness.
It's a light or a jar. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
You will know.
Yeah. However people wanted to describe hell, there's a consciousness of it there's a consciousness that brings to the person in hell an unspeakable pain. An unspeakable pain.
The choice is ours.
The choice is ours.
It is ours, yeah. We determine
That's right.
where we go.
That's right.
I mean, God wasn't willing that it should be.
That's right. God sent Jesus for everybody to be saved. And everybody can be saved. But not everybody will be saved. Which is what will come. I've already erased it. When we come back in 2 or 3 weeks on Sunday night, we'll deal with the doctrine of universalism. Which is everybody's going to be saved. And by the way, that's a growing influence in religion today because it makes people feel good.
Yeah, I started saying that.
It makes people feel good to think that everybody's eventually going to go to heaven.
Well, this annihilation thing, to me, that's not no good thing. I mean, after you live here on earth, then that's it for you. You'll never have another thought. I have kin folks and everything dies. Nobody knows you've ever here. To me, that's not nothing to look forward to.
That's true. That's exactly right. All right, any other questions or thoughts on this? All right, so we're going to close the book on annihilationism. When we come back, we'll talk about universalism. Is that correct?